Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Monarch ball python, and I've actually had my eye on the Monarch for the last 5 years, ever since I've been in ball pythons, and believe it or not, as a morph it's been out for about 10 years or more, and to my astonishment there's only been a limited amount of combos made from the Monarch. It's actually recessive mutation, so it takes a little bit longer to actually work into some of your combos, but I think probably the number one thing that really holds up the Monarch is that it looks really close to the Ultramel. You know, some of these jeans, you know, when they first come out, they are really expensive. The Monarch is still holding its price really high, and you're always like, you know, am I going to spend thousands of dollars for another line of Ultramel? And one of the experiments I'd like to see someone do is actually take a Monarch and breed it to an Ultramel. Both of them are recessive, and if they're not compatible, you'd actually get normal looking snakes that are het for both. That's what I'd really like to see to actually invest in the project. So I'm not investing in another line of Ultramel, and I would say it's similar to like when you look at the Super Sulfur and the Super Fire. There's some differences there. Some people think it's the same gene, but you can actually get some extreme examples of both where you can tell the difference. But if you could actually prove that they're not compatible, that the Monarch is not another line of Ultramel, I think a lot more people would actually invest in the project. And as I've actually seen quite a few Monarchs that look completely different than any Ultramel I've ever seen, but I've seen some that look exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the internet and I want to show you the Monarch, some of the combinations that have been made, and I want to show you side by side the differences between the Monarch and the Ultramel. Alright, so I'm going to jump back and forth between the world of ball pythons and Morphmarket, and I want to start with this snake right here. This is a Monarch, a really awesome snake. Probably one of the best recessive mutations just as a standalone morph, and it's almost like a two-tone orange, and it's kind of variable too. If you actually look at different Monarchs, sometimes the background can be a little bit lighter, sometimes it can be almost black. It depends on which. It almost seems like there's different versions of Monarchs that people are working with. As a matter of fact, I actually came over here to the world of ball pythons and typed in Monarch and did a quick search on how many combos there were on Monarchs, and to my surprise there are actually only 6 combinations that are with the visual Monarchs, and it's pretty amazing. The Monarch's been around for a long time. I would have expected dozens or maybe hundreds of combinations by now, and it's kind of an anomaly that a lot of people haven't really gotten into the Monarch project. And I kind of wanted to show you what the Ultramel looks like. This is the Ultramel, and if at first glance you can say this looks really close to the Monarch, and that is kind of what keeps me from actually jumping into the project, especially the huge price differences between the two morphs, the Monarch versus the Ultramel. And if we kind of take a closer look at the Ultramel, essentially what it is, it's like a two-tone orange snake, and it has a little bit of white coming around the patterns, like on the bottom part of the pattern on the side, and the top of the head is a little bit faded out. And you come over here and compare that to the Monarch, you can definitely see the white coming around the patterns and a little bit faded on the head, and you can definitely tell the Monarch in this example is a lot brighter, has a lot more contrast than the Ultramel. So what I want to do from here is I want to jump over and kind of show you some of the combos, just separating out the genes without the Monarch, and then we'll add the Monarch in to see what effect it has on some of these genes. I want to start with the Enchi. This is an Enchi, and an Enchi is probably one of the most popular genes in all of ball pythons. Essentially what Enchi does is it really reduces the patterns. You can see it really wipes out the alien head. Sometimes Enchis can be really variable. Sometimes you'll see just stripes, like in this case, sometimes it'll be just a slight reduction in pattern. And this is what happens when you add Enchi to Monarch. Take a look at this. This is really awesome. This is it's probably one of the best combos I've seen. I think anything goes good with Enchi, and it really keeps a clean contrast in most cases with Enchi. And I kind of wanted to show you this snake compared to this one right here. Take a look at this. This is actually an Enchi Ultramel. Ultramel, and you can compare the Enchi Ultramel compared to the Enchi Monarch. Really close in appearance. And at first glance, you can see this one's a little bit older because the scales are a little bit bigger than this other one. This one's a little bit younger, but you can see they're almost the same amount of color and pattern, and they almost look exactly the same. I think that's where a little people get kind of confused between the two, and a lot of these combos are really close. As a matter of fact, if you look at this Ultramel, it has quite a bit of really dark black background. Not quite as black as I've seen in some Monarchs, but I'd say it's really close. And if you actually compare it to this one, it's blacker than this one. You get, you know, you kind of get them confused just based on the color. I'd really like to see if these two jeans are compatible. That is what would sell it for me. So here's another one. This is the Pastel. The Pastel is pretty much the bread and butter of the ball python industry. Really popular, really inexpensive. The Pastel reduces patterns not quite as much as an Enchi in all cases. I'd say it really depends on the line of Pastel, but usually Pastel is known for bringing out a lot more yellow in the snake. This is what happens when you mix Pastel with Monarch. Take a look at this. This is really awesome. And I'd say in this case, I don't know if you can get a Pastel Ultramel that would really look as impressive as this. Essentially what it's doing, the Pastel in this case, it usually brings out the yellow, but in this case you really can't see the yellow coming out too much because the Ultramel is just really visually dominant. But essentially what the Pastel is doing, it's bringing out some of the highlights right down the back of the snake. As a matter of fact, if you had like a super Pastel, you'd get even more of these highlights coming right down the ridge, and you can definitely tell the Pastel's in there from the faded out head. It usually fades out the head even more. So here's another one. This is the Mojave Pastel. So two genes in this snake. The Mojave is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic. You breed two Mojaves together, you get an all-white snake with blue eyes. And this is what happens when you mix the Mojave Pastel with the Monarch. Take a look at this snake. And this one, you can definitely tell it's slightly different Monarch. It seems like if you look at different Monarchs, sometimes they can really be variable from different, almost seems like there's different lines within Monarch. Some of them are a lot brighter and more contrasting. And in this case, you can definitely see, usually with the Mojave, it kind of changes all the little patterns into like keyholes like this, almost like you can put a skeleton key right in the hole there. And you can definitely tell the Pastel is bringing in the highlights here, lightening the head a little bit. And the Monarch's kind of interesting in this case. It's not really overwhelming the colors and the patterns like you'd see in albino. You can actually see quite a bit of the Mojave and the Pastel coming through. Here's another one. This is the genetic stripe. The genetic stripe is another recessive mutation, so it's a little bit harder to actually hit the genetic stripe with the Monarch. It's actually a double recessive, so you'd actually breed the two together and you get double hets. You breed the double hets together and your odds are pretty low to actually hit the genetic stripe Monarch, and this is what it looks like. Really awesome. And it's kind of interesting. I've actually gone through and looked at quite a few Monarch genetic stripes. Some of them have just a little bit of dashes right along the top, and some of them have like a stronger line, but you can definitely tell the influence from the Monarch really lightening the snake. It makes for a really impressive combo. So I kind of wanted to show you this one. This is a kind of an unusual example of the Monarch, and in this case, you know, some of these pictures can actually be photoshopped. So I was kind of looking through the pictures where I thought the contrast and the color was appropriate for the picture. You can kind of tell this guy has a normal colored hand, and the grass looks like, you know, the grass in your backyard. And I think the colors on this are really appropriate. And you can definitely see in this specific example how dark black the background is in the Monarch. And I've never really seen anything like a jet black background like this in the Ultramel. Although I have been digging through the Ultramels on Morphmarket, and take a look at this one. This is as close as I could find. This is really close. This is an Ultramel, and it kind of has the blackest background I've seen, but not really like a jet black background like you saw on that last Monarch. You can see it's a little bit grayed out, so I'd say there's definitely some exceptions between the two lines, you know, between the Ultramel and the Monarch, and I'm still convinced that they're completely separate genes, but I'd still like to see the pairing between the two to see if you actually get double hets, if they're compatible or not. So when it comes to the Ultramel, I'd say this is kind of the typical color of an Ultramel. I'd say this is a really good example. Usually the Ultramels are not that jet black when it comes to the background. I'd say this is kind of the typical color that I've seen here at my local reptile shows with some of the Ultramel. The cool thing about the Ultramel is it gets bigger. It really holds the color and the contrast and doesn't really fade like some morphs. This is a really beautiful animal. So I kind of wanted to show you some of the comparisons of the prices between the two, and that's probably why a lot of people don't get into the Monarch, because you can actually pick up an Ultramel for a fraction of the price, and in a lot of combos it actually almost looks exactly the same. So take a look at this. This is actually the lowest price Ultramel that is currently for sale here on March 2020. I should put the date out because the prices always constantly change. And this is, the lowest price usually is from someone undercutting everybody else. So if you actually scroll up a little bit, the lowest one's about $250, but it really goes up quick to about $450, $500. I say, usually, so for some of these combos, here's an Ultramel 100% het caramel for $600 and another one for $700. I'd say at my local reptile show, I'm seeing them probably for about $400 to $500 on average for a visual Ultramel hatchling. And if you take a look at the Monarchs, take a look at this. This is the Monarchs that are currently for sale. There's only 8 of them, and the least expensive one is $3,500. I think that is where the kind of the resistance to getting into this project. And if you knew it was completely different than Ultramel, for me, I would definitely think twice about investing in Monarch. I definitely want to know if it's not just a different line of Ultramel. That would sell me on the project right there. And these go all the way up to like $6,000. And you start thinking about these projects. This is actually a recessive project. So kind of the cheap way to get into a recessive project is to buy the hets. So I actually came over here on Morphmarket and I pulled up the hets sorted by the lowest price, and to my surprise, even the hets, the cheapest one, is selling for $600. Pretty amazing. So if you actually bought the visual for $3,500 and you bred it through your collection, every single snake you bought would be worth at least $600, which I think would be a really good investment, investing in the project, a really good return on investment if you're investing in the Monarch. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And Karina Borsi asks, can you do a video on all the different ball python morphs and identify them? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, I went over to Morphmarket and counted all the morphs. There's actually 180 ball python morphs over on Morphmarket. And I sat down and did the calculations. If I actually covered every one within a span of 10 minutes, I would get exactly 3.3 seconds for each morph. And essentially what it'd be like a slideshow of all the morphs for 10 minutes straight, just showing all the different morphs of ball pythons. I couldn't even explain kind of anything about the snake, and that's one of the reasons I'm going through one by one and kind of covering each one in depth. As a matter of fact, I actually have a playlist on my YouTube channel where I go through all the different ball python morphs, and I go in and kind of explain each one in detail so you can get a really in-depth understanding on each one versus just kind of blazing through and showing you all the snakes. And I'd say some of them, I'd say there's quite a few morphs that are really subtle, that almost look like a normal classic wild type ball python. Unless someone actually kind of explained the differences and picked them out, I think it'd be really difficult to actually just kind of blaze through all of them and show you all the individual morphs. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.